Welcome. Welcome to the Ministry Forum podcast, coming to you from the Center for Lifelong Learning at Knox College, where we connect, encourage, and resource ministry leaders all across Canada as they seek to thrive in their passion to share the gospel. I am your host, the Reverend John Borthwick, Director of the Center and Curator of all that is ministryforum.ca. I absolutely love that I get to do what I get to do, and most of all, that I get to share it all with all of you. So thanks for taking the time out of your day to give us a listen, whether you're a seasoned ministry leader or just beginning your journey. This podcast is made with you in mind. On the Ministry Forum podcast, we're talking ecumenism again. Yes, following on from our interview with the Reverend Amanda Curry, President of the Canadian Council of Churches, and our episode marking the week of Prayer for Christian Unity with a recording of the sermon from Knox College Chapel by the Reverend Dr. Pablo Kim Sun, Intercultural Liaison for the Presbyterian Church in Canada, that he delivered to a gathering of Toronto School of Theology staff and students. Our soon-to-be shared episode where we had a chance also to talk with the Reverend Professor Dr. Jerry Pillay, General Secretary of the World Council of Churches. You Ministry Forum audience are certainly getting a solid grounding in the world of ecumenism, whether you like it or not. And today's interview will contribute brilliantly to enhancing your knowledge and perhaps igniting or fueling more passionately your own desire to pursue more ecumenical relationships and attentiveness. Today's guest, the Reverend Professor Dr. Sandra Beardsall. Sandra was raised in Brampton, Ontario, and she was a ministry candidate from Grace United Church and ordained in 1985. She served rural congregations in Newfoundland and Labrador and Eastern Ontario before her appointment as Professor of Church History and Ecumenics. For some reason, I got stuck on that one. You can help me with that. Ecumenics at St. Andrew's College in 1997. She lives in Saskatoon with her spouse, the Reverend Dr. Bill Richards, Professor Emeritus of Early Christian Language and Literature of the College of Emmanuel and St. Chad. She enjoys ongoing volunteer work, especially ecumenical engagement, and is a voluntary associate minister at Grace Westminster United Church, Saskatoon. I'm aware that there's so much more to say about your life and work, Sandra, and I look forward to sharing our conversation with our Ministry Forum audience. At Knox College, we often hear of St. Andrew's College, Saskatoon, as our Dean, Christine Mitchell, was on staff there prior to joining our community, and she was instrumental in making our connection today, and certainly sings your praises in the world of ecumenical shared ministries and so much more. Sandra, welcome. It's great to have you on the Ministry Forum podcast today.
Oh, it's a delight to be here. Thanks for inviting me, John, especially after all those other illustrious ecumenical guests.
Yes, we certainly have been filling our cup with ecumenism, and we're delighted to do so. So, Sandra, maybe let's start with a little more about you. I've touched on some of the things that you shared on your bio at St. Andrew's College website, but is there anything else by way of introduction that you'd like to share with our Ministry Forum audience?
Well, that was pretty thorough, so thank you for that. And I'm originally from Ontario, but have lived a long time in Saskatoon on Treaty 6 territory, but also ministered in Newfoundland and Labrador, and included in that was a shared ministry, Anglican and United. So we can talk a little bit more about that later. And otherwise, one of my other activities is Scottish country dancing. So there's a little bit of a Presbyterian connection to that. And
you're making fans amongst the Presbyterian crowd for sure.
Okay, that's good. And of course, I value my relationship with Dr. Christine Mitchell, and I'm glad that she's serving so well at Knox Church at Knox College in Toronto.
Yeah,
but I think you've covered many things there, so that's fine.
Excellent. So maybe it happened in Newfoundland and Labrador, but where did this spirit of ecumenism come from in your journey personally?
Well, that was an interesting question for me. It started very early. I remember as a young child, I was taken to the United Church by my parents, but I was always curious about those other people, my friends who went to other churches, and what were they doing? My best friend for a time when I was, around 10 and 11 was a Baptist, and I ended up going to her Baptist church camp, her Camp Hermosa, on the shores of Lake Huron, and I learned a different way of being Christian, and it wasn't the way I had experienced it, but it wasn't bad. It was interesting, and when I was about 11 or 12, I guess, and wanting to be confirmed, I got it in my head that before I was confirmed United Church, I should go and visit, some other churches to be sure. So that was a rather cursory experience. I had a Pentecostal friend, so I was, went to one of her services, one service with an Anglican friend. And I was a brownie or Girl Guide, I guess, by that time at the Baptist Church. And so that the sum total of that experience, I decided I would be United Church. but I always was curious. So I guess there were Catholics that lived in my neighborhood but couldn't come to my school because they went to a Catholic school. And I always wanted to know more. So I guess it started very young and continued from there when I did have real ecumenical encounters in university, in theological school. I attended, I was at the Toronto School of Theology, and then in ministry. So just carried on from there.
That's amazing. I love that before you were going to take the plunge with the Uniteds, you said, I need to check out some other places just to make sure that this is what I want to do. That's an amazing gift. Well done. Yeah. I was actually baptized United because it was the closest church in the community where my parents lived. So they lived on the top of Lake Superior in Nipigon, and they weren't going to drive to the Presbyterian church, they said. So I got baptized United. So
right.
A little ecumenism in my early days as well.
There you go, right from the start, right?
Indeed. Now, when I was doing a little bit of a search about yourself online, I discovered that you are the moderator of the Nicaea 2025 steering group of the World Council of Churches Commission on Faith and Order. Wow. Can you tell us a bit more about that role? When I was interviewing Amanda Curry, she spoke of this, and when Jerry Pillay was at Knox College for a visit in December, he also spoke of this big celebration of the Nicene Creed. Yeah.
Right. And the Council of Nicaea. Right. So, well, I can, so I'm a member of the Faith and Order Commission. That's a long-standing organization. It predates the founding of the World Council of Churches, which was founded in 1948. But it was Christians getting together before that, concerned about that the churches needed to discuss more than just their ministries in mission, which is what they were up to, but they needed to talk about what do we believe and how can we reconcile our beliefs and how do we organize ourselves. So that's where the order comes in. It isn't sort of policing; it's more about organization. And now that commission is absorbed, of course, into the World Council of Churches, and people are appointed to that via being nominated by their church. So I was nominated by the United Church of Canada, and then out of the nominations, they form a commission at the World Council of Churches that votes on a commission. So I was serving on that commission when when the idea came that they would like to celebrate the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea that happened in what's now Iznik, Turkey, was then Nicaea in the Roman Empire, and close to what was going to become Constantinople, where the Emperor Constantine was building himself his own city. And he wanted to bring the Christians together because he'd heard there were some conflicts, but he recognized, and he was the emperor who first recognized and legitimated Christianity as the empire, as a legitimate and then kind of central piece of the empire. And he was worried that these Christians, if they stayed divided, might harm his own empire in some ways. So he called this council, 1700 years ago, and said, I need you to get on the same page together. And there were disputes among them, but he invited them. He paid for the council, and they sat together for about 6 weeks and wrestled through their differences and came out with decisions, including the one that's the most commonly understood, and that is the Nicene Creed. And that creed's important to us because it's the only creed that all Christians in the world at some point signed on to. Everybody, all the bishops in the world were invited to the Council of Nicaea, and most of them came. And so there's a sense that we've never been as united as a church as we were at Nicaea, even though it was difficult and there were people that were upset. And so why commemorate it now? It's a long time ago, but it's also just this opportunity to reflect on, okay, what happened there? Not just the creed, but that's important, of course. What does that creed mean for us, especially in churches where, the Nicene Creed isn't often used, and our United Church and maybe our Presbyterian churches are examples where that creed isn't sort of front and center the way it is in the Catholic Church and certainly in Orthodox churches where it's said every day. So what does it mean to us to have this common creed? And that's part of what we want to discuss. And what does it mean that some churches don't use creeds? And so how do we find our unity when we don't have those things to unite us? And then also just to ask ourselves, where are we now for invisible unity? How do we stand together as churches, and what inhibits us, and what can we celebrate? So that meant that it would be a good time to have a world conference, which the Faith and Order Commission has held 5 previous times since 1927. The last one was in 1993, a long time ago. And so this one will be it will happen in October in Egypt at the invitation of the Coptic Orthodox Church, a big Christian church in Egypt, and we will be at a retreat center near Alexandria, close to some ancient monastic foundations, and about 150 of us together will kind of reflect on these questions together from all around the world and all different church traditions, including churches that are not members of the World Council of Churches. So it's a broad sweep of churches. And I sort of fell into being the moderator for the steering group of this. I won't go into the details. Anybody who's Presbyterian knows what it's like to sort of get seconded to do some work on a committee. And partly it is, I think, because I speak English and I come from a church that likes to be organized. And so those skills are being put to use as we pull together this big conference. And we're planning that this conference will have all of its main sessions live streamed and recorded so that people around the world, with some translation into other languages, so that people around the world can be participating at relatively the same time as this conference is happening and engage in it together. So we're hoping those things will help it all come to be. So that's the short what and why of Nicaea 2025.
That's amazing. You're quite right. In all my years in congregational ministry, I must confess we probably only used the Nicene Creed maybe 5 times in my 25 years. Yeah, we just didn't get to it much. We would do the Apostles' Creed for sure. But even even the creeds themselves, I find in the Presbyterian Church are really starting to maybe fall from use. In the tradition of you might have it. I just led communion in a 2-point charge on Sunday. In one church, they have a tradition of using the Apostles' Creed. In the other church, they didn't. And I think we're seeing that probably across the country. Yeah.
Yes. Well, the Reformed tradition, we all said yes to all the creeds. So we didn't deny that we agreed to those faith statements, but there's been more of an emphasis on the kind of ability to claim your faith personally in some way or name it. And sort of name your own theology. And so certainly the United Church, that's the same. We inherit it in slightly different ways from Methodists and Presbyterians and Congregationalists, but we didn't sort of center ourselves around that ancient practice of saying creeds together. And so my task, I guess, is to kind of invite everybody to think about their relationship with creeds. And of course, so that for Protestants, it's saying, well, how might it help us to really reflect on, and I've had to reflect much more deeply on the Nicene Creed being part of this and realizing there's some real gifts there and riches there. What might we benefit from, exploring it a little more? And so kind of trying to encourage not just the historic Protestants, but then there are the Pentecostals and others who say, you never say a creed because it all has to come from the heart. So inviting them into that question. But then also I hear Catholics and Orthodox folks and some others who use the creed more regularly say, the problem is we say it so often, we don't listen to it anymore. And so what does it mean for us to pay attention to the words we're really saying each time we say it? And so I think all of those things can invite us into a kind of deeper reflection on our own discipleship and our own faith, which I think is crucial in an age where especially in places like Canada and other Western countries, Christian faith is kind of undermined, and we feel a little bit besieged in many ways, including our faith communities. So how do we strengthen our own, the faith at the core of our own being? That's part of what brings us to this, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and definitely in Protestant churches, very, very true in Presbyterian contexts, when the Apostles' Creed is being said, I always find it fascinating where there's a kind of a mumble or almost a hushed tone as we say we believe in the Holy Catholic Church. We're not sure. The Presbyterians just aren't sure. Should we be saying that out loud? It's like, yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Yes. I always find that at baptisms of United Church or of folks especially like that. Did you just baptize my child into the Catholic Church? It's, well, actually I did, but it's not the Roman Catholic Church. It's the Holy Catholic Church, all of us together.
Indeed. Well, certainly in the show notes and just because it's now on our radar at Ministry Forum, we're going to continue to sort of keep people checking out the World Council of Churches website and the Nicaea 2025 website as well. Like, it sounds like a really interesting moment in time for us as the Christian church across the globe. That's amazing.
Well,
and amazing that you get to be a part of that.
It is. I'm very honored.
Egypt.
I am. Yeah, exactly. I am very, I'm lucky because Canadians are disproportionately represented in the World Council of Churches. Canadians were really at the forefront of the early ecumenical movement in the world, and so we play a larger than life role really all through the World Council, and it's I think I'm benefiting from the history of that relationship, and they count on Canadians to be part of it all. So yeah,
that's great. Yeah, nice Canadian flag thing to wave as a part of it all.
Right, in these difficult days, right?
In these times, yes. Sandra, when I mentioned your name to folks, people often associate you with the Prairie Center for Ecumenism. Can you tell me a little bit more about the center and maybe your involvement with them over the years?
Sure, yes. Well, the Prairie Center for Ecumenism was founded in the 1980s by a Roman Catholic priest, Father Bernard de Margerie, and he was a recent ordinand at the time of the Second Vatican Council. And so just as he had been ordained and was kind of embarking on ministry, this council kind of upended the Catholic Church in many ways, or opened the doors and the windows, and he became really fascinated with the possibility of ecumenical engagement, and he just he came on fire. He was set on fire for ecumenism, and it asked his asked his bishop if he could pursue that as part of his ministry, and he got permission to do that. And there's a great story from early in his ministry when he and another priest thought, well, we should try to visit some Protestants. And the United Church was having its regional, its conference meeting, so all the churches in Saskatchewan were coming together at Knox United Church in Saskatoon, and he asked if he and his colleague could maybe come to this meeting. So he tells the story of he and his ministry colleagues showing up in their little black clericals and quaking in their boots, like terrified they'd be thrown out. And of course, they received a standing ovation. Everyone was so happy to see them. And it kind of it sort of solidified his vision. And he worked really hard to bring the other churches in. First, the Catholics just sponsored this with their own finances. And finally, they convinced other denominations to come on board. And so it's multi-denominational. Each of the denominations contributes financially and to the board membership. So when I moved to Saskatoon to take up a job, the pronunciation is ecumenics, but nobody uses that word anymore, and it's usually spell check makes it economics. So, but I was church history ecumenics, so I was a natural to be asked if I would be the United Church member of the board. So I joined the board for a number of years, but I've stayed just connected to their work because of my work and my interests. And it's a wonderful little center with very few resources, manages to do as much as it can. It sponsors the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity. It sponsors a whole part of their website for Ecumenical Shared Ministries. They're the only ones who have a full directory of Ecumenical Shared Ministries in Canada, but they also sponsor educational opportunities and very supportive of work of the Canadian Council of Churches. So a lot of work from a small organization. So that I'm just happy to be able to support them in that.
Yeah, and it feels like maybe it's just how the world is aligning and the personalities and people who are in that neck of the woods of Saskatoon, but it just feels like there's something about Saskatchewan that brings out ecumenism. Is there something about Saskatchewan that brings out ecumenism? I don't know.
Well, there is to some extent
Okay.
in that as settlement of like the settler colonial project wended its way across Canada, Saskatchewan and the other prairie provinces were sparsely populated. They needed to work together in many ways. So that's where cooperative movements formed and all sorts of things. But also then they cooperated ministry-wise. So they formed ecumenical ministries before even the United Church Union, and they just spontaneously came together and said, we need to work together and we have to work together. So that maybe is a little part of it. And so it may be the need for small places to gather together and a kind of spirit of cooperation that we've inherited. I wouldn't say that it's, universally experienced all the time. And it may be just partially good luck that some of us have ended up in this place together. But certainly, Amanda Curry, a great ecumenical leader, her partner and spouse, Nick Jessen, a leader with the Catholic Church. And we've had good, we've had Catholic bishops who've really supported their people being involved. And so it just, things have aligned, I guess.
Yeah, I wonder as well if it's being an Ontario person, there's a sense as well that maybe the further you are away from the what some might think of as the center of the universe and such entrenched ways of being and traditions and things like that, the further you are away, the little more that you can feel a little freer, go a little more rogue, do your own thing. Like, who's going to know? You're in Saskatchewan. And so let's just do our own thing, like what we need to do.
Yes, I think you're onto something there. I felt that because I moved from I was ministering in part-time and I just finished my doctoral work in Eastern Ontario. But even in that part of Ontario, I think there's a longer history of settlers there, and they do become more entrenched in certain ways. And I realized, we talk about the big skies of Saskatchewan, and there was some sense when I moved here. I thought, yeah, those big skies represent some kind of opportunity in some ways. So I think you've hit on something there, John. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm also seeing it in like presbyteries and some of the leadership that's given there, where because of the realities that many churches are facing, they're trying to come up with creative ideas,
Mhm.
whether or not the denomination officially is catching up to some of those things. Like they need
Right.
to do things
Right.
for the sake of
Right.
the people involved, and for the sake of the congregations, and for the sake of their
Yes.
leaders as they do this. So
Right.
yeah, really interesting, really interesting.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah.
So you've
Yes.
mentioned,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just one example. Apart from the congregational sharing, I'm on the board of an ecumenical chaplaincy for the University of Saskatchewan, which is Anglican, United Church, and Presbyterian. And the Presbyterians more than pull their weight on that, for that experience. And we cooperate with the Lutherans, and together we pay for the chaplain. And so that's partly because we yeah, so necessity helps to breed that, but then once you're there, you realize that that's an important ministry you want to share. So yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, so let's talk a little more deeply about ecumenical shared ministries.
Sure.
To be honest, in my 25-year plus tenure in congregational ministry, within the Presbyterian Church in Canada, uh, I haven't seen, but again, my experience is limited. I haven't seen too many ecumenical shared ministries that have worked well in the context that I've sort of, whenever I've intersected with them. I want to believe that there are some that have worked really well and have thrived. I assume it's mostly related to people and about sharing, not surprisingly. But I'm wondering if you might give us hope today, Sandra, that this is a thing that could actually work, and could be
Well,
a beautiful thing for the kingdom of God as we go down.
well, amen, brother. Yes, I think so. So a shared ministry, just to clarify, is and fortunately in Canada we do have a kind of common definition. The Americans don't have one. So they have these ministries, but they don't have one way to describe them. But in Canada, back in the late 70s, really, they sort of developed a common definition, which is that it's two or more denominations sharing ministry in a meaningful way, and while retaining, not losing their denominational identity. So this isn't like sometimes they call themselves a community church, but they remain grounded in covenants that they sign with their distinct denominations, and they remain grounded in those denominations. So they operate together and mutually, and they share in differing levels of sharing, but they are, but they consider themselves one ministry together, and that sharing then is um, is is financially beneficial. It provides a witness to the community that they're working together, and there are there are well over 100 shared ministries across Canada. And Presbyterians are involved in, quite a few of those, about a dozen congregational ministries that Presbyterians are involved in, maybe more. One of our challenges is keeping track, and new ones are forming more regularly, and especially in the Maritimes, where there are, more Presbyterians spread more thickly on the ground. We're starting to see some more of those developing.
Hmm.
They do thrive, and they've been thriving since really since the late 1950s, when they first got started, but in bigger ways into the 1960s. and then they started in pockets, in different pockets, places where there were where there was very sparse population, often in northern Canada, in the central regions of BC, northern BC, northern British Vancouver Island, Quebec, where Anglophones were in minorities, especially in company towns across northern Ontario. So those were places where they got their starts, and then in the 70s they started to flesh out into the prairies and other places. Southern Ontario was probably one of the later or less common places to find shared ministries initially, but as life changes, those places are also finding the advantages of cooperation. So there are lots of them around, and I can tell you about a couple of them if you'd like me to.
Yeah, for
Yes.
sure.
Okay.
I'm keen to hear of some that you're aware of
So
that are going well.
Here you go. Here's some Presbyterians that are enjoying shared ministry. Well, one of the very earliest founded ones that's still going today is in Pinawa, Manitoba. Now that's a company town. It's a research facility for nuclear research, and the people that founded it had been in a shared ministry in Deep River, Ontario, and then they were all being transplanted. So with them, they took not only their other expertise, but they took their desire to keep sharing in ministry together. So since 1963, Anglicans, Presbyterians, United Church, Mennonites, Baptists, and Lutherans have shared ministry there. Now, the Baptists kind of declined just in numbers. There weren't as many of them. And so they're not still formally part of the covenant, just because there weren't enough of them to kind of hold on to that. And the Lutherans did build themselves their own church in town. So they kind of withdrew from the formal sharing, but they still share ministry over the summers. So there's still some, but the Anglican, Presbyterian, United, and Mennonite remain there in strong ministry. And part of what has helped them with that is they decided early on that they weren't going to build a church building. They were going to rent space and in the school, and they learned they found ways to set that up so that it would be so it looks beautiful and is amenable, and so they kind of saved money from the get-go on that choice. So they're there. Another one that's been around quite a long time that I've not visited Pinawa, but I visited Chetwynd, BC, in northern BC. And I don't know the exact date of their founding. It was the 1970s, I believe, when they were expanding into the north. Anglican, Presbyterian, Lutheran, and United Church. They sometimes call themselves Paul Ministries, Presbyterian, Anglican, United, Lutheran, Paul, Paul. And they are a small church that has a big heart, and they are a loving church family that's been together for many decades. When the lay people there describe for other people, that relationship, they use the language of a marriage, and I often use that in shared ministry too. Partnerships, close partnerships with and including marriages, where you don't give up your own identity, but you learn to share your identities, and some things that you thought you were going to cling to, you find out, well, actually, we've developed our own tradition that's a little different from either of our places, but we still know who we are, and still have our family of origin in a sense. And so Chetwynd kind of describes themselves a little bit that way. They found ways to be together that honor their traditions and also honor their long time together. A little more recently, but not that recent, is Deer Park United Church and Calvin Presbyterian in Toronto. So two big uptown churches in Toronto. And if you don't mind me telling their origin story, it's kind of special.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So Deer Park was Deer Park Presbyterian Church. And then in 1925, as many Presbyterians, especially in Toronto area, did, they voted against or a number of them voted against going into union, but the church itself had voted in favor, like their church. So the majority of the Deer Park congregation voted in favor, but there was a significant minority that voted against. And so they left, and they founded around the corner in Uphill Calvin Presbyterian. Mm-hmm. And so they maintained themselves as two big Toronto churches for many decades. But Deer Park fell into difficulties. They had leased some of their land to an oil company that used it as their headquarters, and in return, not only paid some rent on the land, but also gave them free heating oil. And in a giant church like that, a big old stone church, this was really crucial. Well, that company decided to move its head office to Calgary, and took with it that perk. and the church realized, as well as the kind of general decline that was accompanying many churches at the time, they could not afford this big building anymore. They still had a beautiful choir with paid soloists and lots going on, but they couldn't afford their building. And so the presbytery, the United Church Presbytery, suggested that they move in. They showed them, a couple with one of the close by United churches. And they said, if we do that, we'll just be absorbed. We won't be ourselves anymore. So they struggled with that. And then who came knocking at their door but Calvin Presbyterian. And they said, we could be a shared ministry together, and you could still be Deer Park, and we can be Calvin, but we can share a building together, and that will share our resources. And since we're Presbyterian United and our worship is almost the same, we could share worship together. And so that became the solution for these people at Deer Park. And they tell the story of, they suitably said goodbye to their building, and having had their sort of closing service the previous week, then the next Sunday they gathered at Deer Park, and they walked over to Calvin. So they processed with some of their treasures from their communion ware and things over to Calvin Church, where the Calvin symbolically opened the doors, and the people were all singing. They were singing a hymn, but they turned in their pews back to face the people coming into the church, and they made space in all their pews. So people making space in their pews, always a big thing. They moved aside in their pews so that as people came down the center aisle, they could fan out into the pews and be sitting with the people of Calvin. And so they tell that story as the way that was their marriage ceremony in a way, right? How they came together. It doesn't happen easily and quickly. There was lots and lots of negotiation behind the scenes. There's lots of just mechanics around who owns what and how do we negotiate some of those things. They had two now beautiful choirs to sort, and I think it took them a while to meld those experiences, but they're still in action. And I happen to see that they are currently looking for a United Church minister. What they have is two clergy. They can still afford two clergy because of their status and their resources. And so they always have one Presbyterian and one United Church clergy person. And so they're looking for the United Church component just now. So if any of your listeners know of a United Church person who would be a good fit with a Presbyterian congregation, that's a place to go. So that's another one that's more recent, in the late 2000s, 2010s, but still going strong. So those are some examples.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. That's and I love that image of making space for folks in the pews. That's so amazing. Yeah, because that would be a real challenge. From what you're sharing there, I think it would be helpful for our listeners, I think, to understand better. As I was listening to you, there's a sense of, I guess, are there degrees of ecumenical shared ministries? So the language of like a campus church was a term I've heard before, where we're a church that has as many, in some cases, as maybe 3 different worship spaces, and they would call themselves a campus. but they're basically all autonomous, and maybe a few times a year they share worship together. But there's a shared building, and they maybe even have
Yeah.
built a building with the purpose of sharing.
Mhm.
Is that one level of ecumenical shared ministries?
Yes, that would be kind of the that one end of the spectrum, and it's
Hmm.
not as often because that's kind of that's expensive to purpose build. If you didn't do it a long time ago, right? But that happens. So yes, we always say you start somewhere, and sometimes so it depends on what the need is that's sort of recognized in the community. I mean, it people sometimes say, "Oh, it's only about economic need." Well, economic need is real, and it fosters it fosters other things. I did a survey a few years ago of ecumenical shared ministries, and I asked them, what role, I asked them to check off the different kinds of roles that motivations played, like economic need, desire to present a more unified ministry in the community, desire to get to know each other better, be part of, in our cases, United and Presbyterian, not so much this, but some Anglicans and Lutherans are part of a full communion agreement. Is that part of it? Or did you just want to share some programming together and some of that? And 100% of the people who responded to the survey said economic need played a role, and so that's not surprising. But then, like 95% said that having a unified ministry in the community was important. It was also as important. So it's a combination of things, and depending on, so sometimes somebody's building has tanked, and so they're looking for then they can see sharing a building together, and so something like the Deer Park Calvin, where they have managed to maintain two clergy. That rarely happens.
Hmm.
Usually the impetus then is to say, well, then do we share clergy in some way? Sometimes clergy will be shared across different buildings. So where they can't afford clergy or find clergy, they'll share a minister who, does the service either twice a Sunday or once, or they go all together to one church one Sunday and the other church the other. Right up to complete integration. The church I served in Labrador was Anglican and United, and so it was an Anglican United congregation. So my congregants were officially Anglican and United. They were also other things. It was a company town, Churchill Falls, which is a electric power town. We've heard about them recently in the news. And but it was a company town where they built one church, and they said, "You Christians sort it out." And there weren't people of other religions there at the time, or they weren't even imagining other religions. So so the Anglican United congregation shared the building with the Catholic parish, and then we had wonderful relationships across those boundaries as well, and had a bishop who was very, very amenable, and a priest who only visited occasionally, and there was a lay pastoral worker, and I worked closely with her. We did youth work all together. And once a month we were given permission to share a church service together with the Catholics, and they were permitted to do that. And so that was complete integration, and so there can be ranges of everything in between. So Pinawa, the other two I described for you, and Chetwynd, they're completely integrated. Their worship is together, but that doesn't necessarily mean their worship is the same every week. Often they will rotate their worship. So if you have like three, often you will have two or three church denominations represented, and they'll take turns. And so one Sunday is Lutheran, and the next one is Presbyterian, and the next one is Anglican, and they'll rotate those through. And then sometimes the fourth Sunday is the minister's choice or something. So they honor their traditions in the ways that make sense for them. And often we encourage them when they get started to do that rotational pattern, so that people don't feel like they've suddenly been thrown into something completely different. But we also then that means you're learning somebody else's worship tradition, and that's a challenge. So that's something you have to learn. But then, while you've given up doing the same thing every Sunday that you do in your own church, you learn. We call it, you become bi-liturgical. You learn another language, another way, and people in shared ministries say that's something that's really rich for them after they get used to it, that they can communicate with God in a slightly different way. So it's a variety of things. We still have places where just the building is shared, and that's often. That's like there's a little town called Nicaea in eastern Saskatchewan, where recently the Catholic Church just couldn't afford to keep its building going, so now they share the building with the Anglican Church. And I haven't heard that they may do some special services together. They probably do special ecumenical things together, but of course their liturgies generally are distinct. But that's an example of just sharing the building too.
So does it require? I'm sensing that it would require a certain kind of leader to be able to, because I'm, as you said, the unique one with Deer Park and Calvin is that both of them are able to call or bring on United and a Presbyterian. But I'm assuming that in many of those cases where there might be as many as 3 different traditions that are represented, the leader who might be trained in one of the traditions, I want to be respectful, but kind of like plays Anglican or plays Lutheran one Sunday versus then their whatever they were raised in or whatever they were trained in. And I guess the other piece that I'm curious about in that is, is it ever been necessary, or has anyone ever done something whereby they get cross-trained almost? I mean, I know it's just liturgy and most of us can figure that out, but I even wonder around some of our traditions get pretty excited about, hey, like, you're not authorized. I mean, I remember one time an Anglican priest let me stand at the altar to I'm losing the word. Co-celebrate.
Co-preside, con-celebrate.
Yeah,
right?
he was an Anglo Catholic, so he used some really big word. But I got to stand there, and a couple of Anglicans came up to me afterwards and said, "That's a pretty big deal. Like, not everybody gets to stand at the altar." And so, just curious about that.
So there's a variety. You got that's a very important question, and it's one that I tried to work on all through ministry, and it was challenging in that. Really, you do. Ideally, there's something that helps to train people, and I used to offer a course in it, and I offered it in different ways, and that was really helpful to people if they need some kind of education, obviously, in doing this. But before the education, they need the kind of heart for it. They need to say, "I am willing to." Not to give up my tradition, but to learn another's tradition, another's language, so that I can serve them effectively. So it takes a kind of an ecumenical heart, which takes me back to some of the reason I think it's important even just to reflect on the Nicene Creed in the way that I mentioned, just because you have to ask yourself, what can I learn from somebody else that I think I've got it all here in my own church, but what can I actually perhaps learn? And so being willing to learn helps. And then it's learning some of the practices. And there was a fellow who was a long time shared ministry a long time in northern BC, and he was interviewed after the fact, and he said he was Anglican and United. He was United Church, and he said, it took me several months of doing the Anglican liturgy, which he had been licensed to perform, until I finally felt like I was like really praying with it. So it takes time to learn. So one thing is to learn it and to become fluent in it so that you feel like you're really engaged in it. But the other question that you ask, and this is important for Presbyterians and United Church people, is that we are not in full communion with the Anglican Church. And while we would recognize their clergy and say, sure, go ahead, preside at the table, we are not recognized. Our ordinations are not recognized in full. That we are not fully. There's not mutual recognition. There's been a lot of work on that. The United and Anglican churches have been working hard at that, trying to kind of bring ourselves closer to the possibility of full communion. In the United States, they've managed to work it out. Sort of thing, if they can do it, and so there's so then it's up to the Anglican bishop to at least license or recognize the shared ministries minister to do at least the regular, like a morning prayer, what we call regular non-Eucharistic service. And so it's at the celebration of the communion that it becomes more complicated. And any Christian can baptize, so that's not the issue. Of course, confirmation happens in the Anglican Church through the bishop. So no matter what your shared ministry, you bring in the bishop, if there's an Anglican being confirmed, to do the confirmation of the Anglican members. But that's a bit of a challenge in shared ministries that include Anglicans and United or Presbyterian clergy. And
so would you be reliant on, because I know the Anglican, from what I know of Anglicans, they have a strong tradition. I don't know what the difference is, but a strong pull for retired clergy. So would you be sort of relying on a retired clergy person to do basically the Eucharist at times, or someone to visit and do that?
Exactly. It's one of those. And when I was in Labrador, there were this community was a company town where you had to move out when you retired because you didn't own your home. And so there were no retired people in town. So somebody had to drive 3 hours across a gravel road to come and give a Eucharist to the Anglicans. Now, that didn't mean they didn't get Eucharist. It's just they got the Holy Communion according to the United Church rite. And we actually started doing it every week because Anglicans wanted it more frequently. So, and there are many Eucharistic prayers or communion prayers that United Church and Presbyterian people use that look very similar to Anglican Eucharist. And so the people themselves, very few of them felt they were being deprived. They didn't feel like they were deprived of ministry, but in order to honor that need for, Anglican communion, this person had to drive over a gravel road 3 hours to come and do a service. And so that's, that is one little challenge in ministry. But it's overcome by what you say. People whom the bishop can, through their own polity, legitimately appoint to or designate to be a person that can visit or sitting in the congregation who can help with that. So, and the people are usually very supportive of their own clergy and try to make all that happen with grace.
And so it's always fascinating to me because that's the that I hold both. I honor both in the sense that in the community that I served in a community here in Guelph for 21 years, and my good Scots Presbyterians would get a little cranky every so often when we would do certain services together. We really tried. We worked hard to have ecumenical services at least once a year, do some pulpit exchanges and things like that. And my Scots would get a little ornery about the church on the hill, the Roman Catholics, and sometimes the Anglicans, but mostly they're picking on the church on the hill, the Basilica, and they would typically, in a typical way, they'd say, well, like the Catholics would be welcome here for communion, but we're not welcome over there. And I would always say to them, there's something about honoring a tradition. I said, I have a really good relationship with the priest on the hill. I imagine that if I came forward for Eucharist at a service, I imagine if it was him, he would probably give it to me. But I don't do that because I honor his tradition that says that there's something, the table is broken. We're not in full communion together. And until that happens, we can't do that. And so I honor that and respect him for that, because I'm also known, if he's seen giving communion to me, there could be trouble, and I don't want to give him that kind of issue. So it's holding those things in tension, right? Like there's still these pieces, and even around some of the other practices within, some churches have rules and regulations and things that they do that they hold dear, and traditions. How do we honor that and respect that? And not just sort of dismiss it as like, well, we can do everything we want. It's like, I really appreciate how you're describing that in those, but those are tension points, and those are the challenges sometimes, right? Yeah.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. And of course, even within our own denominations, we have some of those tension points. So we have to remember that it isn't just across those boundaries, but those are painful boundaries, especially with the Roman Catholics, because we can take Anglican communion from it. I mean, we're allowed to go to the table in the Anglican Church, and they are allowed to come to our table. But it's that painful divide that that hurts us all. And I struggle to understand it at times, because I'm out of that tradition that says it's Jesus' table, come on down. But I wouldn't ever say it that way in church.
No.
No,
for
but,
sure. Don't say that in Egypt. Don't say that in Egypt. You'll get in trouble.
Probably won't be saying much around a table in Egypt. Yeah, yes, that's right.
Since that could be a problem.
Yes, that's right. But it is. It's the painful part of that. That the Catholics say is important, because it reminds us that there's some things we haven't worked out. So, what we always have to press each other on is how important is this church dividing? Is this thing, enough to keep us from the table or from each other in some other way, And that's an ongoing, big question for ecumenical life, is what has to divide us? I mean, what has to keep us apart, because we can't solve it. And it's ecumenically, in a global sense, we're coming much closer to one another in so many ways that we just have we just have things we haven't worked out yet. So,
sure.
But yes, thank you. I think you've described it really well. That it's and just to say, most Catholic priests would not ever bar someone from the table, because that would look like a scandal of the Mass, and so they would serve you and then afterwards call you in and say, that wasn't really appropriate. And like you, though, when I go somewhere, it's clear that I'm a person that should know that difference. And so I do go forward, but I ask for blessing. And so it's not the same, but it's what we can do. Right. And, we always have our points that we think, we've got it all together. Why don't they just listen to us?
Right.
And every one of us harbors those things in different ways at different times, right? And
for sure.
And so part of the discipline of ecumenism is recognizing I need to know where I need to learn, as well as where I hope others will learn from my tradition. Yeah.
Well, and I even had in congregational ministry, I had the experience one time where I had married a couple, and then they weren't really they were connected to me, but not to the church that I served in Presbyterian tradition. And this was early days in my ministry, so it was good to have this learning so that I could share it along the way. So they decided they had a child, and then they decided to go, because one of them had sort of a background in Catholicism. So they decided to go to the Catholic Church to have their child christened. And it was a terribly painful experience for them. They were so surprised by what happened and how the priest presented it. And at least it helped for me to hear what happened. They talked about a binder, and then they said that you'll come on this special day, on this day, and you'll do this. And they said something about a marriage or a wedding. And the woman said, "Pardon? Like, what do you mean?" well, and then he, every person in ministry is their own person. So I don't know, they might have got a priest who might have been a little cranky. And he basically said, so where did you get married? And they got married at a hotel property or something. And allegedly he said, so not on holy ground. Who married you? Oh, well, like a minister at the Presbyterian Church. Right. So not a priest. So what you're going to do is come to this special occasion where the church will remarry you.
Oh,
In the eyes of the church. Yeah, I know. This is not everybody's a perfect ecumenist, I guess. It could have been phrased a lot different, but I just want to honor and respect that those are the traditions of the Roman Catholic Church, I assume. And so it allowed me at least to say to couples when I was marrying them, like as the pre-stuff, to sort of talk about, if you ever decide to have your child baptized or christened and you ever go to the Catholic Church, just know that there are certain things that they would ask or might require you to do if that's a tradition you want to follow. In some cases, not every case, but it could be bishop to bishop or priest to priest. I don't know. But yeah, just really sad.
They do have rules actually that are that are wider than that. I mean, that embrace everybody, and then so all Catholics are under the same rules around ecumenical engagement, and then within that, each bishop can set up the pastoral norms for that. So I've never heard of that, and so it sounds like that priest was not following the rules. And so one of the things, well, one thing that's helpful though, so not just clergy and shared ministries, but all of us as clergy, is to know what are the actual rules for the other churches. And we have in 1975 we signed an agreement together as churches, in Presbyterian, Lutheran, United, Roman Catholic, and Anglican, that we would honor the validity of each other's baptisms. Mm-hmm. So there would be no reason for a priest to interrogate any of that, and to say that these people are somehow invalidly Christian. Now, in this case, he said invalidly married, but we do recognize each other as Christians. And so it's a bit of I've never heard of anyone going through that before, and I've heard of other things, but not that.
Yeah.
So so part of it is
I always framed it as they have rules. They have rules.
They do, but it's important for us to know what their rules are too in all of our different churches, so that when people come to us and say that I'm not allowed to, it's like I'd say, well, I'd like to find out about exactly what you're allowed to do, and just be sure about that, because that's painful and traumatizing for people.
It was, because it furthered where she started asking questions about, well, in the eyes of the church, what are we as a couple, and then in the eyes of the church, what is our child? And that got really messy. Anyways, the other curiosity I had regarding Ecumenical Shared Ministries is around governance. Presbyterians, we love our governance. We love our polity. We just can't get enough of it. How does that get worked out? Does an Ecumenical Shared Ministry create some kind of like standards of operating procedures? Do they be Presbyterian polity for a year and then United and then Anglican, or how does it all work?
Well, good question. Well, there's an Ecumenical Shared Ministries handbook that was put together by national church staff in the Anglican, Lutheran, United, and Presbyterian churches. And that helps kind of say, here are the things you need to work through in terms of polity. Generally, what they do is they have, when you come together as a shared ministry, you do so with a covenant. And part of that covenant is describes how you're going to organize yourselves. Now, so usually you develop a board for the shared ministry, and that covers all the things you're going to do together. So if you're sharing the building, then that's part of that covenant. And then you also develop, but you usually have to have some sort of committee or subgroups that handle the things that come specifically to deal with the polity of your denomination. So, who are you going to send to presbytery? And and what do you do about like who goes to the synod meetings and the General Assembly if there's someone elected to, and all that sort of thing. They have a combination of so they still follow their own polity where they need to. There might be decisions that all Presbyterians have to make through remits, and so then the Presbyterians vote on those as a block within the larger part of the congregation. But generally, and to some extent, those of us who have have a lot of polity, we sort of win the day, and that there's a fair bit of polity goes into creating a shared ministry, and others abide by it. One of my interests was I worked together with some American colleagues on this book that we together wrote called Daring to Share, and it looks at shared ministries in the United States and Canada, and there are some terrific ones in the United States, really interesting ones. But they're where our shared ministry agreements might be. Well, the one that I had at Churchill Falls was 2 pages because it had been formed in 1971. Today they're probably more like 5 to 10 pages, and at the most maybe. And then in the United States they have one that like here's our Constitution, and then here are our bylaws.
Wow. Yeah.
Covering every possible thing that you might think about. And one thing that shared ministry agreements do or should have, often the older ones don't, is an opting out clause. What happens if it, and this American congregation that had very detailed descriptions of everything prefaced that with saying, we do not ever anticipate having to end this ministry together. However, if we did have to, here's the legal. So so they do create, and then those those covenants are signed by their what we call judicatories. Whoever in the presbytery is responsible for overseeing, that congregation would be signing that. It would be someone from the United Church region would be signing it now that we have regional governments in the United Church. And then, and likewise, if it's a diocese or a synod of the other churches. So they all sign on. And those become the kind of that's the operating manual for that shared ministry.
So again, from a leadership perspective, you'd have to be open and flexible and have a bit of a sense of how this particular ministry is going to be led. Because I mean, even thinking this simple things of like in the Presbyterian Church, the moderator of the session of a church is the minister, and in the United Church, the moderator or the chair of council is not the minister.
It's right. That's
and
right.
then in the Anglican tradition, I think there's like 2 wardens that the minister gets to, or the priest gets to have a part of, but isn't technically, the wardens are kind of in charge of the day-to-day or the decision-making of the church in some ways. Is that fair?
At least they have a significant role in the parish council.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the kind of thing that we would hope, if we could only have, a common training opportunity for people, and it's not just an hour, but it's, even if it's a week of training that just helps people to familiarize themselves. And then, in any church, you have to learn the ways, the ropes along the way, but at least to have the basics, it really helps. The thing that people that ministers and shared ministries complain about the most is the duplication of meetings and paperwork. And
that's what I was fearing. I was feering, oh my goodness, you have to fulfill the Presbyterians, the Uniteds, and the Anglicans, or whatever you've got. Wow.
Right. And so now I think there was, and I think it maybe fell by this wayside, but there has been a common reporting mechanism so that all the basic material information that you would have to report to any denomination is on a common form that's been put together by the national churches working together in a national churches task group that does that shared ministries task group. And so that helps a bit. And then it's recognized that the minister can't go to every meeting of every denomination. And so there has to be something done to make sure that, if I'm the minister and it's an Anglican and there are Anglicans there, that the Anglicans are suitably represented in places where I would be permitted to attend. Like, Anglicans are quite open to me attending their meetings. And even if I was the minister of Anglicans, I would be permitted to vote, except on things that had to do with their core foundational theology and polity. So, there's quite a bit of hospitality around that, but there's also there are limits to what one clergy person can do. So that's part of it.
I always said in Guelph, where I served, that lots of the conversations that would happen, we had a gathering. It was really just to have lunch, but I sort of convened a gathering of all the people who were in the old stone churches, all the ministry leaders. So the church on the hill, the basilica, the priest came, and we had the evangelical church that had purchased the United Church, and they would join us for lunch. And in our conversations, what often would transpire is sort of imagining what the future looks like. Say what would there have been, like seven big stone churches in the city, and 2 Uniteds and 2 Presbyterians amongst that. It was maybe more than that. It was 9, I think it was. And we would often joke that we're more likely to in the future to join with the United Church or even the Baptist Church or maybe even the Anglicans, that we're going to consolidate at some point, than we would with our Presbyterian brethren, or the United Church guys were saying the same things about their United Church, and the Anglicans were actually saying the very same things. Yeah, we're never going to get together, but maybe we could get together with you Presbyterians someday. I'm aware that the Prairie Center for Ecumenism's website has this Ecumenical Shared Ministries toolkit, and I think you were instrumental in that. If I was a minister sitting somewhere in a community and was thinking, hey, how could I have my first conversation with the Baptists or the Anglicans or Presbyterian or whoever it is? It looks like a really amazing website with tons of stuff available. Could you say more about that, or would this be a good first step for folks?
Well, sure. If you want to just figure out what the heck is this anyway, the toolkit has some like PowerPoints with text, so you could walk a congregation through a little PowerPoint, or even just a colleague, and you could walk through it and say, okay, what is it? How do you get started? What kinds of things? Mainly, it's starting with conversation, and so I think the toolkit's a great way for people to kind of get some comfort in working through some of those things. But it initially starts with the conversation that you guys are already having. And I think, that it isn't just because, those United Church people aren't like our United Church people, but it's also neighborhoods have a character. And one of the things I love about shared ministries is it can allow ministry to continue in a neighborhood where there might be 3 churches that are of different denominations, but they can kind of keep the life going together. That's more like each other than it might be like a neighborhood that's in a those people in A-frame churches. What do they know about stone churches, right?
Exactly. If your church wasn't built if your church wasn't built in the late 1800s, you don't know anything about being church. Yeah,
right.
1970s. Oh my goodness, no. We can't be with those people.
That's right. So but there's sometimes those demographics are different, and it also kind of can help hold neighborhoods together. So I think that's important. But the way to do it is to start with a conversation, and like the Calvin Deer Park issue, sometimes that is a less threatening conversation than being told that you should amalgamate with another church of your denomination and probably move to their building because it's more sustainable or whatever, and the kind of fear of losing your identity as you're absorbed, even with the best of intentions, whereas in a shared ministry, there's a kind of, the denominational boundaries help to keep that identity not exclusive and rigid, but it holds it a little more in place. So it's a little advantage of shared ministry if you're thinking about it. But certainly, I hope people can check out that it's pcecumenism.net, and that Shared Ministries Toolkit is a way to just get yourself a little bit familiar with some of the details. It's got some stuff that's like PowerPoints. It's got the Shared Ministries Handbook is there. We're increasingly adding things to the archives. This afternoon, we're recording some interviews with people in Shared Ministries that are going to be put up there to show from the practitioner's point of view what it's like. So I encourage people to have a look at that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's certainly a conversation I'm even seeing more and more as there's models being put out there now around, for lack of a better expression, like a cathedral model. So and we actually used to talk about that in Guelph as well. There'll be one cathedral church that's the Christian church cathedral. Maybe there'll have to be two because the Roman Catholic Church will still have to have its basilica. But there'll be one cathedral church where we do cathedral kind of worship, but then there'll be these offshoots elsewhere, regionally or within, like you say, neighborhoods. But even listening to some, I get to go and visit other churches regularly. And, sometimes hearing how folks in a rural community are feeling about those conversations when they're held only within the denominational space. So a presbytery having a conversation with a variety of churches and saying, we need to have less churches, and them having that sense of losing their identity, or what do those people know? And to a guy who's been mostly suburban and urban in most of my life, it's always interesting. But just like you said, neighborhoods have their own flavor. But in rural communities, it's like, what do those people in the big city, which really isn't, it's just a slightly larger town. What do those people in that town know about our way of being here in this smaller community? And so, when you think about in those smaller communities, there's probably 2, 3, 4, 5 different Christian churches. When are they having their conversations that could really be meaningful to them to share the continuance of their witness in those smaller communities, as opposed to just consistently saying we need to close that one down, and everybody has to go to the bigger town or to the city or whatever that looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, there is that model was developed in the late '80s in Milton Keynes, England, and it was sort of a post-war built town, which you don't find that many of in England. Usually they're very historic, but they built a cathedral called Christ the Cornerstone that belonged to everybody. It was including the Catholics, and then, as you say, then had shared ministries out into the community, the various surrounding communities. But so it's a possibility. It really happened.
Is it still going? Is it still a thing?
As far as I know, I have not. As you were speaking, I thought I should have checked. I should have checked out to see if the Catholics were still part of it. I haven't heard I haven't checked it recently, but I visited it a number of years ago, and it was still there as a cathedral for everyone.
That'll be homework for our ministry forum audience to check out if
check it out.
Christ the Cornerstone Church in Milton Keynes.
Keynes,
it's still a thing. That's amazing.
Right.
Well, as we wrap up today, Sandra, there's a question I asked Amanda and also Jerry Pillay. And I think I have a suspicion of how you're going to answer, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. We hear so often, or at least I do, that the Christian church is really going to be a church in the future without denominations. Around that lunch table with the variety of different flavors of denominations, often these leaders were often saying things like, nobody in our church cares about denominations anymore. We could all just be the same. It would all be just fine. Do you personally envision a future like that? Is that even something you would think of? And as a passionate advocate of ecumenism, what might be lost? I have some suspicions. If we move in a direction of just devaluing our denominational heritage, how would you answer that question?
Right. Well, it's an interesting question. I'm also a church historian, so I like it when people remember history and honor it in appropriate ways. So you can let go of the things you don't need anymore too. I think it would. I do not try to imagine a future with no, imagine no religion. Because I think the future's in God's hands. So what's faithful today? Well, faithful today is honoring what you've been given and treasuring what you know of your own faith. And so people may say they don't care about denominations, and at some level they don't, until something's taken away from them that they realize they treasure. So I don't find that people are as anti-denominational as they might think they are. I think what they think of is bureaucracy and, too many meetings and things that they think would waste their time. So I think more importantly is sitting down together at that table and sharing the gifts. The sharing is the important piece for me, not. And sharing doesn't mean that everything goes into the same stew pot and you just stir it up and then it maybe tastes good or tastes kind of bland. It's figuring out how to learn from one another and appreciate each other without without demanding that the other kind of lose something that's of real value to them. There may be a time when there's nothing that we don't all agree on. And if that comes because that's how the Holy Spirit has moved in us, well, that's great. And I'm always for closer and closer sharing. But I do believe that it's not the goal is not that we just become one homogeneous thing, but that we become that we celebrate diversity and the unity and diversity somehow that we can gather together. So,
yeah, beautiful. Is there anything I haven't asked that you were hoping I would today?
Well, I think you've covered so many things well. I think that's great, John. And I guess my only puzzle was you said that you weren't sure about some of this shared ministry stuff, and yet you really embrace the spirit of it. So. So maybe people need to hear that you don't have to have it all figured out in order to explore it. You just need to be kind of curious and open to the other and see where that takes you.
Yeah, for sure. And you certainly have given me hope and inspiration for this ongoing idea and reality of ecumenical shared ministry. I just want to offer my thanks to you for having this conversation with me today. This has been great. I've learned a ton. So appreciate that. And thank you for all the work you've done in continuing to sort of spread the word and encourage folks to engage in this kind of really interesting ministry that could be, for some, I think it would be an amazing gift to be able to share that, such the variety and the diversity that comes in leading a space like that.
Well, thank you, John. I really appreciate this podcast that you do and how you assist people in ongoing ministry. And I'm delighted that you invited me to be part of it. So thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on the Ministry Forum podcast. We hope today's episode resonated with you and sparked your curiosity. Remember, you're not alone in your ministry journey. We're at the other end of some form of technology, and our team is committed to working hard to support your ministry every step of the way. If you enjoyed today's episode, tell your friends, your family, your colleagues. Tell someone. Please don't keep us a secret. And of course, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review in the places you listen to podcasts. Your feedback helps us reach more ministry leaders just like you. And honestly, it reminds us that we're not alone either. And don't forget to follow us on social media at Ministry Forum on all of our channels. You can visit our website at ministryforum.ca for more resources, keeping up with upcoming events, and ways to connect with our growing community. Until next time, may God's strength and courage be yours in all that you do. May you be fearless, not reckless, and may you be well in body, mind, and spirit, and may you be at